Hello, my friends, and welcome to Evergreen Perspective. I'm Ben Chrisley, and I'm truly grateful that you're here with me today. I know you got like a million or maybe a billion things you could be doing right now, but the fact you're choosing to spend that time here with me, that means a lot. So whether you're out on a run, driving to work, or just sitting back having a nice cup of coffee, I want to welcome you here today. Today, we're going to explore a topic that's been under debate a lot recently. That's the growing fascination with billionaires, their outsized influence they're having on policy, politics. And for me, one of the most surprising trends I'm seeing a lot of is lower and middle class individuals coming out to defend them tooth and nail. I mean, what do they think they're going to do? Throw them a gold nugget if they come to their defense enough? I'm not really sure. It seems a little weird to me. So I know the subject brings up a lot of emotions for a lot of people. Some of you maybe even admire these guys, Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg. You know, you might admire some of the work they're doing or think they're creating a lot of jobs, whatever the case might be. Or maybe it's one of the other 801 billionaires out there. If that number seems like a lot, well, just keep in mind that it's like 0.00024% of the population. So becoming a billionaire is a exceedingly rare achievement, to say the least. You know, in fact, if a college graduate were coming out, the status of reaching a billionaire is about 1.5 million. And yet, despite all of that, as rare as it is and how much money they have, right, we got to realize how much a billion is. It's 1,000 millions. Think about that for a second. People are coming out to fiercely defend them as if their life depends upon it. You know, meanwhile, the billionaires' money just continues to increase every day, right? While the American wages remain stagnant. So the reality is, we're living in a class war, one that isn't fought with weapons, but one that's with policy, economic systems, corporate influence into all the above. It's a battle between those who have and a battle of those who have not. So those with the wealth and those without. The wealthy are accumulating money at rates we've never seen in our time. It's compounding at such a quick rate that it's astronomical. So the question is, why do so many people align themselves with those at the top? Why do so many everyday hardworking Americans decide that, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come out in defense of this billionaire because they're doing such good things for everybody. Even though the system is designed for those of us that don't have millions and billions to just keep us working and basically kicking upstairs, right? So no matter where you stand on this issue, I want this to be a space where we can conversate, we can break things down, examine facts, but most importantly, I want this to be a space where we can listen to each other and hopefully grow and learn, and hopefully one day work together to figure out how we can do better together. So I believe in a system that rewards hard work, right? And that's what we want. And right now, what we have is a society where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few at the expense of many. So the big question is, why do we come out and defend the ultra wealthy, even when their financial gain often comes at the cost of paying fair wages and economic equality? All right, to get us started, I'd like to take a moment to talk about how extreme wealth has evolved over the last century, because as most of us know, this is the numbers that shape our economy and the policies that impact our lives every day, and the narratives that have led us here to give us what we think about when we think about billionaires ourselves. But before we dive into that, I want to read you a little story about my friend named Jake. Jake was living his dream, but it didn't come easy, right? So when he first set out to open his small independent bookstore, we're going to call it Evergreen Reads, he quickly learned that passion wasn't enough. The bank wouldn't give him a loan because he didn't have business credit, so he had to do it the hard way. He worked extra hours, took side jobs. He saved every dollar he possibly could, sacrificing nights out, vacations to try to make his dream a reality. And after years and years of grinding, He finally had enough money to open his store right in the heart of his community. And Evergreen Reads wasn't just a bookstore. It was a place where people gathered, where kids discovered their love of reading, where local authors got their first break. It wasn't making them rich, not by any stretch of the imagination, like most small businesses don't. But it was sustainable, and most importantly, it was his, and he'd worked darn hard to get to where he was. Jake had always dreamed of owning a bookstore. The shelves were filled with books that he handpicked with care. The atmosphere was warm. Kids curled up in the reading corner. You can see it, right? Local authors coming in for signings, neighbors gathering around to talk about coffee and politics. Jake believed in the power of the small business, and he thought it would stand the test of time. But as we'll see as we go through this podcast, the reality was much, much harsher. When we think about billionaires today, it's easy to believe we're living in a time of unprecedented extreme wealth. But the truth is, extreme wealth is as old as time, eternal, right? Consolidation isn't new. Capitalism, the way we have it, isn't new, but we've outdone ourselves. But over a century ago, we had men such as Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan. A lot of those names probably sound really familiar to you. They dominated industry, shaping America's economy landscape, much like we know Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg do today. Let's take Vanderbilt, for example. He built his fortune in railroads and shipping, but he was notorious as a ruthless business leader. His tactics were well known, including wage suppression, monopolistic control over transportation. He'd drive his competitors right out of business. He consolidated his power. He could set the prices to whatever he wanted and continue to maximize his wealth. Meanwhile, his workers toiled away for terrible wages and dangerous conditions, and all he wanted to do was expand. You know, it mirrors Musk a lot, right? With Tesla or SpaceX or the Boring Company. Tons of reports of unsafe working conditions and long hours. Anti-union practices continue to be waged in companies that he owns. Matter of fact, Musk's companies, including Tesla and SpaceX, were under as many 17-plus federal investigations for random issues ranging from labor violations, workplace discrimination, and vehicle safety concerns, and even financial misconduct. However, in a highly suspicious move, many of these investigations abruptly were dismissed shortly after the establishment of this new DOGE. That's the Department of Government Efficiency, for anybody that hasn't been paying attention. Right, it's this newly created agency under the Trump administration that Musk himself is heading up. The sudden removal of 5 inspector generals soon followed after that, who had been overseeing these serious allegations that had been waged against Musk and his companies. As DOGE continues to dismantle regulatory oversights, it's becoming increasingly clear that it isn't about efficiency what they're doing. It's about consolidating that power and ripping apart our republic from the inside. Let's get back to a little history lesson. I diverged there for a minute. I went off the rails for a second there. But let's get back to a little history. That's what we're talking about now. We got Andrew Carnegie. His name should sound familiar. He started out from humble beginnings, working in a textile factory for a little bit of nothing, but quickly climbed the ranks in the railroad industry. He saw an opportunity and he aggressively went to work in that industry. As soon as he got a little headway, nothing was going to stop him. And as soon as he got up, Carnegie kept his wages as low as possible. He fought viciously against labor unions and crushed worker strikes with brute force. It's a really infamous, it's the Homestead strike of 1892. He hired a private security system. Get this. He hired private security system, basically hired thugs to go forcefully break up protesting steelworkers. But yet later in life, right, Carnegie came along, and you probably think about the philanthropic things that he did, donating the equivalent of billions today to libraries and universities, while avoiding the entire time paying his workers a fair wage, right? He was trying to make his reputation seem a little better by doing a little bit of good towards the end of his life. This might sound a bit familiar. Elon Musk follows a strikingly similar playbook today, driving down costs in Tesla factories, aggressively fighting union efforts, and yet simultaneously he's hailed as some visionary for humanity, going to push us towards space travel and sustainable energy. Much like Carnegie, he presents himself as a pioneer, someone whose ambitions justify the crappy treatment of the workers, treats them like mere cogs and his machine that he can move along. But we all know he's in it for his own gain. I mean, it's pretty clear at this point. I think, maybe not, you might have a different opinion. Love to hear what you have to say about it, too. Don't forget you can always comment below on your thoughts. I'd like to touch on Rockefeller, the oil baron. He was ruthless himself. He secured exclusive deals with the railroads to choke out competition. He nearly took over the entire oil industry himself. He was at one point one of the most powerful men in the world, right? That allowed him to dictate his prices, expand his fortune endlessly. And much like the other billionaires we've talked about, where history tells us, right, these workers were exploited for low wages. The company faced numerous labor disputes, right? Just like our billionaire companies of today. We're like, oh, they're doing a good job for us. I think history is going to show us that they too were ruthless. They too kept wages intentionally low. And so eventually for Rockefeller, finally an antitrust lawsuit came, right? And they broke up his empire. But, much like the other billionaires we're talking about, at the end of his life, he started throwing a lot of money into philanthropic endeavors, to cement his legacy. But history always tells the truth at the end of the day, if you can find the information. We talked about Jeff Bezos a little bit. He operates in much the same way, right? Amazon has dominated the e-commerce and logistics, outcompeting and absorbing smaller retailers by slashing prices, leveraging tax advantages, and automating his warehouse. He's built an empire. Like Rockefeller's, it has become nearly impossible to challenge, right? And much like Rockefeller, he also spends now a lot of his time funding space exploration and giving away money here and there to try to help keep his reputation, going and fantastic. But as we know, we can see all the Amazon strikes that have been happening lately. Workers in his warehouses still report unsafe conditions, brutal productivity quotas, aggressive suppression of union efforts, all in an effort to keep those wages low, right? We'd be remiss not to chat about J.P. Morgan for just a little bit. The banking mogul wielded immense financial power. He was able to consolidate power over many industries by financing monopolies and influencing economic policy in the U.S. As a matter of fact, at one point, he even bailed out the U.S. government with his money during a financial crisis. And he didn't do it out of patriotism. He did it because it ensured that his bank retained maximum control over the financial markets. So his consolidation of wealth and power ensured that money and influence stayed in the hands of a select few. And then lastly, I'd like to chat about our friend Zuckerberg. He's built a similar empire, obviously, not all with money, but with data, right? So control over public discourse through Meta, right, has become a monopoly in its own right, shaping elections, controlling the flow of information, determining what the public sees and engages with. And much like his friend J.P. Morgan, Zuckerberg has faced a lot of scrutiny over his unchecked political and social influence. Although I'd say now, comparing him to Musk, I'd say, Zuckerberg's maybe taking a back seat at this point. Let's see if he, steps up. Maybe he doesn't like Musk taking so much of the spotlight. I don't know. But, he used a lot of manipulation to drive profits regardless of the ethical consequences. So that's a little bit of history on some of the billionaires and how they compare of yesteryear to today. I'd like to take a step back and check in and see how it's going in Jake's world as the modern billionaire playbook is kind of playing out in real time. So the billionaire-backed book chain that opened down the street wasn't just another competitor. It was a corporate giant using the same tactics as Carnegie and Bezos and Rockefeller. It secured exclusive bulk pricing deals from publishers, meaning that Jake had to pay more for the exact same books as his competitor because there's a volume discount, right? He couldn't buy the books at the same price that the mega store was buying them for. So he was already losing margin on that, right? And then the chain down the street kept their wages low and cut the benefits, right? Gave them lower operational costs that Jake, he just simply couldn't match them. And so Jake, like many before him, he was never competing on a level playing field. While billionaire-owned corporations can afford to take years of losses just to wipe out the competition, small business owners like Jake, they don't have that luxury, right? They don't have the business. They don't have a business. So the real story is here. Billionaires don't win because they're better. They win because they changed the rules of the game. So the strategies have evolved over the last century, but the playbook remains the same. Billionaires amass power by controlling industry, suppressing labor movements, and ensuring their own dominance. And like in the past, they reach the peak of wealth accumulation. You know what they're going to do? They're going to turn to giving out money to increase the PR on their name. Not because they have some altruism about them, but as a means to manage their reputation, to get some tax write-offs, and hopefully build a legacy. And unfortunately, Jake's story isn't unique. And as we move into the next section, we're going to explore how the deep wage crisis runs. Like, how deep does it go? I don't think we understand how stagnant wages have been and how detrimental that is to small businesses like Jake, right? These billionaire empires exploit their workers every day. Their money is made on the backs of their workers and not because they're paying them solid living wages. And it's happening across all industries around the world, heavily in the United States more than any other place. And so that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the real cost of billionaire dominance and why so many of us are convinced that, hey, this is just the way it has to be. There's nothing we can do about it. But I think we can. There's some stuff we can do about it. I think we hear it all the time, right? We hear it's a booming economy, right? The stock market hit record highs. Unemployment is low. But if you ask the everyday hardworking American, right, their day-to-day struggles tell a different story. The numbers behind growing wealth gap reveal a stark contrast between economic success on paper and the reality that people are facing every day. Hardworking Americans are facing every day is much different than the booming economy. So let's see how things got there, right? In the 1970s, CEOs earned 20 to 30 times the salary of their average worker. But today, you know what it is today? Over 350 times in many industries. 350 times the CEO makes over the average worker. Somebody tell me, and drop it in the comments if you want, but tell me why somebody who's the CEO deserves to make 350 times what the worker makes. I don't see it. I don't see why that should be possible. The top 1% of Americans now hold more wealth than the entire middle class combined. And they got us out here trying to fight with each other over not even a crumb, right? So before you rush to defend billionaires, consider this. Their fortunes continue to skyrocket. Wages for everyday workers have barely budged. Many of these ultra-wealthy individuals and corporations fail to pay a living wage on their job, keeping millions struggling just to get by while they amass unprecedented wealth. The gap between those who have everything and those who can barely afford the basics isn't an accident. It's a direct result of policies and economic systems. They're designed to keep power and resources concentrated at the top. Wages for the average worker have barely budged when adjusted for inflation, while corporate profits have gone crazy. Record levels, right? The richest 10% of Americans own 90% of the stock market. Think about that. The richest 10% of Americans own 90% of the stock market. So for the other 90% of us, that only leaves 10% of that wealth that we even have the ability to try to grasp. Think about that. So while Wall Street celebrates booming economy, most Americans don't feel a thing. But somehow the billionaires and the politicians that are in office sell you a story about how you can reach the American dream. The average American would need substantial investments to fill any of that movement in the market, right? The top 10% hold an average of over $1 million in stocks, right? While the bottom half, barely measurable on a money scale, right? Hardly enough to generate any meaningful returns, right? We already know that. So now consider what happens when corporate taxes are slashed, right? Instead of reinvesting the money into workers' wages, hiring, innovation, corporations are overwhelmingly funneling all the money back into stock buybacks, executive bonuses, so they can drive up their share prices, further enriching the wealth, right? So they can just pitch the wealth back up top. They just say, oh, buy this back, stock's going to increase, more money up top. We didn't do anything to help the average working American, the working class. We didn't do anything. The cycle continues, right? Ensures that money stays at the top, compounding wealth for the billionaires while everyday hardworking Americans like ourselves are left out in the cold. The idea that tax cuts for corporations will trickle down has been proven time and time again not to work. Instead of trickling down, it trickles straight up, right? The rich get even richer while wages remain stagnant and economic inequality just deepens, just gets worse, right? We know that. So let's check in on our friend Jake once the mega bookstore opened, promising cheaper prices, same-day delivery, and an app that recommends books based on users' data. Jake's bookstore started to fill it, right? At first, Jake was hopeful. He thought that he believed in his store, obviously, right? His customers, the experience he had built there, was community. But as the week went by, reality started to set in. Amazon slashed book prices below wholesale cost, making it impossible for Jake to compete. Suppliers started prioritizing Amazon's massive bulk orders, causing delays and increased costs for his small business. Customers were drawn in, right, by the convenience, right, and the price. Even those who said, I'll never shop for a big corporation, I'll only support local. They eventually did too. And Amazon's aggressive hiring tactics pulled away employees from Jake, offering wages that seemed high at first, right, until their hours were cut just below the full-time threshold so that they couldn't get benefits, right? Jake fought hard. He fought back. He offered more events, community engagement, personal recommendations that no algorithm could replicate. But how do you compete when the system itself is designed to favor billionaires? 3 months after Amazon opened, Jake was forced to close Evergreen Reads. The store that once brought the community together now had a for-lease sign in the window. His employees, his friends, lost their jobs. The local authors he once championed now had nowhere left to showcase their work. All right, the children who sat there reading in the nook, they had no more story hours. Amazon? Well, they cut wages, as talked about. They reduced hours. They automated roles after eliminating local competition. Within a year, it wasn't even a bookstore anymore. It had become just a distribution hub for online sales, a warehouse space masquerading as a community space. So why aren't we more outraged? If the economy is growing, but wages aren't, where's all the money going? But more importantly, why do we keep defending those who hoard the wealth while everyday people struggle? To understand how we got here a little bit, we need to take a look at some tax policies. So how they evolved over the years to help support the wealthy. All right, now I'd like to introduce you to Kate. Kate is here to bring us Kate's Civic Corner. She's going to discuss all the civic engagement options that are happening in and around the 3rd Congressional District, and she'll let you know how you can find some in your own area as well.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, it's Kate here with the Civic Corner, taking a couple minutes to highlight some opportunities to get involved. Most of these are coming up over the next week or so in Southwest Washington. I know there are thousands of events nationwide, though, so if you're not in this region, get on the web and seek out events in your area. We'll put a link in the show notes for each of these events where you can find more information, including what to expect and how to sign up. Coming up on March 8th at 9 a.m., we have a volunteer opportunity removing invasive ivy at Barron's Woods in Vancouver, and at 11, an opportunity for political engagement at the Lewis County Democrats' regular meeting in Chehalis. On March 10th at 6 p.m., Battleground has its school district board meeting at 6 p.m. at the Louisville campus. On March 11th at 4 p.m., Clark County has its Parks Advisory Board meeting at Luke Jensen's Sports Complex in Vancouver. On March 13th at 5:30 p.m., the 18th Legislative District Republicans have their caucus meeting. And a nationwide organization that is always welcoming volunteers is Meals on Wheels. Check out the link in the show notes to find your local office and information regarding the various volunteer positions. If there's an event in Southwest Washington that you'd like us to feature here on Evergreen Perspective, please drop it in the comments or shoot us an email. This is Kate with Kate Civic Corner, encouraging you to get out there and get involved. Now, back to Ben.
Change to benefit the rich. What have they done? Well, in 1952, let's look at that. So the top federal income tax rate in 1952 was 92% applied to taxable income over 400,000. So to put that into perspective, 400,000 in 1952 is the equivalent of about $4.7 million today. So if you made over $4.7 million, they were going to be taxing you 92%, right? So in contrast to today, 2025, the top federal income tax rate sets at 37%, which is only applied to income over about 600,000 single, 700,000 for married couples. So this indicates not only have the top tax rate decreased significantly since 1952, but the income thresholds for these has also dropped when adjusted for inflation, right? So corporate tax rates, same thing, right? They plummeted from 52% in the 50s to today 21%, right? This allowed big business to amass unprecedented wealth. Now, the current administration, and all their wisdom, is pushing to lower it even further to 15%, all while cutting essential programs that benefit hardworking Americans. Medicare, Medicaid, right? The entitlement programs. They're going to cut those so that we can give big tax breaks to the rich. It makes sense, right? So let me say this again. We're in a class war, right? Instead of fighting amongst ourselves, we need to stand together and hold this and every administration and Congress accountable. The people in power today aren't just influenced by billionaires. They are billionaires, right? We're witnessing something unprecedented. The ultra wealthy are no longer just shaping policy behind the scenes. Now they're running the government outright, right? There's like 11 or 12 billionaires in the current administration. That's crazy, right? How are they going to shape the laws and the policies? They're going to shape them to benefit themselves, of course, right? This isn't about being a Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party, or whatever political identity you associate with. This is about economic survival of everyday hardworking Americans. It's about whether the government serves the people or continues to be a tool for the wealthiest few. So no matter where you stand politically, one thing is clear. Billionaires are not looking out for us. All right, it's time we stop defending those who profit off our struggles. Let's look at the 2017 most recent corporate tax cuts, right? Significantly reduced. We went from 35% all the way down to 21% in 17, right? The expectation was that companies would take that money and reinvest all those billions of dollars in savings, that they would reinvest them in job growth, wage growth, right? Expansion, right? And that would make the economy better. Everybody would have more money. I would have more money. You'd have more money. We'd have better paying jobs. However, rather than increasing wages or hiring, most of the corporations spent the majority of their tax savings on stock buybacks. Major companies like Apple, Boeing, ExxonMobil used it to boost shareholder value, but failing to translate into meaningful benefits for workers. So as a result, stock buybacks surged to record levels, reaching over $1 trillion. $1 trillion in 2018 alone of stock buybacks. So while corporate investment in equipment, facilities, workforce development remain largely stagnant, this outcome highlighted how tax cuts primarily enriched the wealthy rather than stimulating broad economic growth. So you imagine if they put that $1 trillion into employee training, education, expanding, new manufacturing, innovation, how much better that would actually make the economy in the long term. Meanwhile, they just wanted to put it to the stock so the rich could get much, much richer. And now they're talking about a 15% corporate tax cut. Listen, if you care about the economy and any programs for anybody anywhere, you will get a hold of your congressman now and say no to a 15% corporate tax cut. It's not good for you, and it's not good for America. I'm just telling you. Without strict policies ensuring reinvestment into the economy, a 15% tax cut is likely to exacerbate income inequality further. It's going to worsen the federal deficit. It's going to undermine long-term economic stability. It's going to put us in a recession. I mean, to put it as bluntly as I can, I think it's a very bad idea. Why would we think it would be different this time? Why would we think that we go to 15%, corporations are going to suddenly, make it trickle into the economy down instead of just trickling up, right? If corporations continue to hoard tax savings for stock buybacks, executive compensation, and bonuses rather than expansion and innovation and worker wages, the tax cut, you know what it becomes? It becomes welfare for the wealthy. That's what they like, right? Rather than an economic stimulus, right? They're great. They're master class at propaganda, selling this to the American people, and we buy it hook, line, and sinker. And the numbers don't lie. They just don't lie. I'll give you an example of some great propaganda. It's the estate tax. It was originally designed to prevent generational wealth from growing unchecked. You're probably like, yeah, estate tax. I'm not for it. You know why that probably is? Probably because you listen to their marketing, right? And they got us. They got us, right? It was designed to prevent generational wealth from growing unchecked, right? So ensuring that the ultra rich contributed their fair share rather than passing down their vast fortunes year after year after year tax-free. So yet over time, this tax has been significantly weakened. As of 2025, individuals can pass up to $4 million without incurring any federal state tax, right? So a drastic increase that shields the wealthiest Americans from meaningful taxation once again. This high exemption allows millionaires, billionaires to transfer generational wealth with minimal tax implications, further entrenching economic inequality, right? While the working class continues to struggle. But this is the astonishing part to me the most, was that people were for the estate tax. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. We got to tax them. But then they did a little focus group and a little marketing, and they changed the term to the death tax, right? So it's a carefully crafted piece of propaganda. It was designed to turn everyday Americans against the tax, right? They sold it as, it's a death tax. We don't want to be taxing people just because someone in their family dies. They're in mourning, right? That's the way they sold it. So through fear-mongering, misinformation, billionaires and their political allies, they convinced us hardworking Americans to rally against the estate tax, despite the fact that you'd have to have an estate worth more than $14 million for it even to affect you. Many were led to believe this tax would threaten family farms, small businesses, and middle-class inheritances. When in reality, right, you'd have to have been a multimillionaire for it to make one bit of difference to you. So, they sold it as could harm everyday Americans, but it was never about protecting ordinary Americans. It was about protecting billionaire dynasties, ensuring they could pass down massive tax-free money while the rest of us continued to pay our fair share. The estate tax wasn't a threat to working families at all. But at the end of the day, it was just a big misinformation campaign that dismantled our guard so that we wouldn't be for it, right? So investigative reports have revealed that some wealthiest individuals in the United States haven't even paid federal income tax in some years, right? You can look this up. You can hit the Google for yourself on this one. But for instance, Jeff Bezos, we know, founder of Amazon, right? He paid zero federal income taxes in both 2007 and 2011. When's the last time you can say you paid zero income tax? Oh, wait. Probably never, right? Elon Musk, right? We know how much money he's worth. He paid no federal income tax in 2018. And Warren Buffett, who even admits that he wishes he would pay more tax, but he's going to take advantage of any tax laws and loopholes that might exist. And he says he always tries to pay the most minimal of federal income tax. One time even stating that he paid more or less income tax than his secretary. So There you go. How do they do it? Instances, right? Utilizing legal tax strategies. There's offset their incomes with investment losses, claiming deductions, leveraging the fact that unrealized gains, right? So increases in the value of assets that have not been sold, right? So you can't tax those. They're not taxed as income. And so while all of those are within the bounds of the current law, they continue to highlight the how the tax system has allowed the ultra wealthy to minimize their tax liabilities, right? Meanwhile, you, me, everybody else, hardworking Americans, right? We see a chunk of our paycheck disappear to payroll taxes before we even see our checks, right? So, we've been told for decades that cutting taxes for corporations and the wealthy will result in job creation, right? What a load, right? But the data tells a totally different story. Corporate tax cuts have not led to significant wage growth or job creation. Instead, they've led to increased executive compensation, stock buybacks, right? Countries with higher tax rates on the wealthy, such as Denmark, Sweden, Germany, they maintain strong economies while ensuring that they got a more equitable distribution of wealth. So you're probably saying, hey, what can be done? While this problem does seem pretty insurmountable, you know, there are policy solutions that could help, right? But we got to start voting for the right individuals that aren't scared to do the right thing, right? We got to close some of these tax loopholes that allow billionaires to avoid these taxes. We got to stop slashing corporate taxes without some type of oversight that they're actually going to reinvest that money back into the actual economy. We need to we can reinstate higher tax rates on the ultra wealthy, right? We can go back to similar to maybe something we saw in the mid 20th century, or maybe we find some happy medium in between. But believe me, they have so much money, you're not going to affect what they do, right? They're not going to go hungry. They're not going to miss out on their 6 houses. Nothing in their life's going to change by taxing them more. It just won't, right? We can regulate the stock buybacks. So when they get these tax breaks, right, we can regulate that so they can invest back into the actual market instead of just artificially inflating stock prices, right? We can strengthen workers' rights through wage increases. We can work with unions more to drive wages up, right? But with billionaires running the country, odds of any of those happening are pretty slim. Unions have played a critical role in shaping the workplace, right? The protections that many Americans enjoy today that we take for granted, whether you belong to a union or not, the reality is that organized labor has historically improved conditions for all workers, not just those with union representation. Before unions fought for these rights, workers in America, including children, were often subjected to grueling conditions, dangerous workplaces, and ultra low wages. Corporations had unchecked power, treating employees as 1,000% expendable. It was only through union organizing strikes, collective bargaining, that many of the workplace protections we rely on today became law, right? So even if you're not in a union, you benefit daily from the battles won throughout history. So let's highlight a few of the pieces. The 40-hour work week, right? Before unions, employers often forced and expected labor to work 60 to 80 hours a week without any extra pay. Unions pushed for and won the standard 40-hour work week, giving Americans more work-life balance. All right, overtime pay, thanks to the union workers. Right, thanks to union workers, that now exceed 40 hours now enjoy overtime pay. Right, weekends off, you like that, right? The idea of the weekend, it wasn't a given before unions fought for it. Right, employers were once free to demand seven-day work weeks, right? So before that, you had 7 days a week, 60 to 80 hours a week, right? Could you imagine? Right, minimum wage laws, right? We know the minimum wage currently isn't a minimum wage to do much of anything. However, at one point, minimum wage was the minimum wage that you could sustain to have a living wage, right? Unions helped establish the idea that employers should be required to pay their workers this livable wage. And yet today, we haven't been able to make a budge on the minimum wage. We need to do better, right? Child labor, right? In the early 1900s, children as young as 5 and 6 years old were working in factories under brutal conditions. Could you imagine 5 and 6 years old? It was a union pressure that led to child labor laws, ensuring that kids were in schools and not in the sweatshops, right? Unions demanded protections against unsafe working conditions, right? Leading, whether you have ill conceived notions about the OSHA organization or not, this led to the creation of it, right? Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Yeah, I get it. For some of you that work on jobs where they come a lot, it can be stressful and sometimes they can be a pain, but imagine if we didn't have those across the United States, how many places would have completely unsafe work conditions? Right? Paid breaks, you like those? Lunch is nice. Well, thanks to unions, workers were entitled to breaks, meal periods, right? So they couldn't exploit their workers even more, right? Union workers on tradition have earned more and continue to earn more in their respective jobs. They usually have better benefits. So why do big businesses want to kill the unions? Corporations hate unions because they empower workers and force companies to share profits instead of hoarding all the wealth up top. I don't know why corporations have such a difficult time just paying their workers a living wage. I don't understand why that's so difficult. How many billions does one corporation need to make, right? The ultra rich corporate lobbyists have spent decades spreading anti-union propaganda, convincing workers that unions hurt businesses and limit opportunities. The truth? CEOs and billionaires don't want you to have power. They want the workforce that is desperate, replaceable, and unable to demand better pay and work conditions. So, hey, if you got weekends off, overtime pay, minimum wage, lunch breaks, safe work environment, you have unions to thank, right? Whether you like them now or you don't support them now, I encourage you to look into a little bit of the history of unions and do a little bit of your own research outside of some of the propaganda we've been sold, right? Unions help build the middle class. They remain one of the strongest forces against corporate greed today and worker exploitation, right? If we want to close the wealth gap and ensure fair wages and stop billionaires from taking everything for themselves, we need unions now more than ever, right? The growing wealth gap isn't an accident. It's the result of deliberate policy choices that prioritize the wealthy over the working class. The question we need to ask ourselves, right? Why is this happening? Why do we allow it to continue to happen? If we want real change, we have to demand policies that prioritize economic well-being of all Americans, not just those at the top, right? We have to vote for those who choose to fight for the good of all Americans, not those that have special interests in mind, right? If you want to follow the money, if you want to know what your politician, what your congressman, what your senator is supporting, a quick internet search, you can find out and see where your elected officials got their campaign money, right? That's a real easy way. There may not be congressional term limits, right? But your vote is the term limit. So demand change now and let your voice be heard. Use your vote. Do a little bit of research. Don't just listen to everything they say out on the campaign trail. I invite you to look at where their money's coming from, because you can guarantee where their money comes from, that's the way they're going to be voting. They're too worried about losing their job. And they should be, right? Billionaires have a huge influence over politics. So wealth just doesn't buy luxury, it buys power too. Throughout history, we know that the ultra wealthy have used their fortunes to shape governments, laws, economic policies in their favor. And while we think that the billionaire funded political influence is a modern issue, history tells us otherwise. During the Gilded Age, which, they seem to be wanting to get back to, right? Industrial magnates like the guys we've talked about, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Morgan, they didn't just run business, they influenced politicians, controlled economic policies, and shaped regulatory laws in their favor. They funded campaigns and lobbied for tax breaks, deregulation, and anti-labor policies, and made sure that those in power protected their interests, right? Fast forward today, we see the same stuff happening, right? We know Musk. Musk reportedly spent, like $260 million to support Donald Trump's campaign, right? Now he's got unfettered access to government contracts, subsidies, influence, right? Policy making. right? He's getting there in Doge, just firing people. So, like, who elected him? I didn't elect him. Did you elect him? I don't think anybody cast a vote for Elon Musk. I surely don't think that anybody voted to have him in there just ripping up systems, right? Jeff Bezos from Amazon, he's one of the most powerful lobbying arms in D.C., ensuring that tax loopholes and antitrust regulations work in his favor. So if you want to know where your elected officials are getting their money for their campaigns, search it out. Like I said, it's not hard to find, right? The Walton family, owners of Walmart, pour millions into elections, pushing for policies that keep corporate taxes low and suppressing minimum wage increases, right? Why would they want to pay their employees a living wage when they can just collect more and more billions and go buy a football team, right? Who doesn't need to have a football team? You know, Zuckerberg, he spent billions on lobbying as well, ensuring that data privacy laws and antitrust actions remain weak, right? Securing their social media monopoly, right? And what are the results of all this? Billionaires just don't influence the economy, they shape society itself, deciding who gets health care, how much workers get paid, and they ultimately decide who holds political office and has the power, right? The idea that billionaires influence elections is not new. What's becoming more alarming is how many billionaires are directly entering government roles or using their wealth to dictate policies in a way never seen before, right? We know Donald Trump, he's a billionaire, self-proclaimed billionaire, businessman, used his first presidency to pass corporate-friendly tax cuts, deregulate industries, and further cement wealth for the ultra-rich. Right? We know Musk and Thiel, both tech billionaires, obviously have heavily funded conservative and libertarian movements pushing for deregulation, tech-friendly policies that benefit their own industries. Right? While some argue billionaires simply just support the candidates they believe in, we know that's not the reality. The reality is that money in politics gives the ultra-wealthy an outsized voice, drowning out the everyday concerns of you, me, all hardworking Americans, right? Americans who cannot compete with billionaire-funded super PACs, lobbying groups. If you want a seat at the table, you better be willing to pay for it, right? So without regulations, you're in an auction for government's attention. You're never going to win that auction, right? Unless you have billions, right? You get priority seating if you got billions. If not wealthy, hey, the line starts way back there, right? Because they don't just fund campaigns, they're influencing legislation itself, right? Their money's buying the same regulations that they want. They influence what's happening. Political donations come with expectations, right? Billionaire-backed politicians are often beholden to the interest of their wealthiest donors. We see it all the time, right? We talked about it a little bit before. The 17 Tax Cuts and Job Act was heavily lobbied for by billionaires. It significantly slashed those corporate taxes. It allowed the wealthy to amass even more capital and wealth, right? Loopholes in the estate tax allow the billionaire families to keep transferring their wealth down, right? Antitrust laws are barely enforced, allowing monopolies like Amazon and Google and Meta to dominate industries without any real significant competition, right? There's some pretend competition out there, but when you really look at the mass and numbers, there's not really competition, right? The impact is working class and middle class Americans bear the financial burden while billionaires continue to amass exceptional wealth, often paying lower tax rates than people who work for them. Can you imagine that? Like, pay a lower tax rate. Yeah, they pay millions in taxes. A lot of them pay millions and millions in taxes. But when you look at the percentage, they're paying far, far less. So let's take a look in on our buddy Jake. So after losing Evergreen Reads, Jake found himself searching for stability, right? He took on some gig jobs, trying to make ends meet while watching his once thriving community now struggle. Small businesses were closing at an alarming rate. And when each closure, a sense of local identity faded. Then came an election. Could have changed things. City council race where one candidate, Alina Alvarez, ran on a platform of supporting small businesses, raising local minimum wage, and challenging corporate dominance. Jake saw some hope in Lena, right? She was a former small business owner herself, someone who understood firsthand what people like Jake had gone through. She ran a grassroots campaign, relying on small dollar donations and volunteers who believed in her. Like they believed in her message. Jake attended town halls, knocked on doors, did everything he could to support her. But you know what? Lena never stood a chance. A PAC, a political action committee, funded by Smamazon parent company, flooded the race with attack ads, painting Lena as anti-business and a radical. The billionaire-backed opponent, who had never even run a business, outspent Lena 20 to 1, buying up social media ads, TV spots, even mailers warning that her policies would kill jobs and hurt the local economy. The messaging worked. The billionaire-backed candidate won in a landslide. Within months, Lena's proposed small business protections were scrapped. City council cut business taxes further, right? They cut them further, favoring corporations over independent shops. Smamazon received a new tax incentive to expand, while rent costs for small businesses skyrocketed, right? Jake watched as yet another wave of local businesses shuttered, right? Replaced by chain retailers and fulfillment centers. Jake's story wasn't just about losing his bookstore. It was about how billionaires control not just the economy, but democracy itself. One of the most powerful tools at billionaires' hands is the use of dark money in politics. It's untraceable donations that are funneled through super PACs and nonprofit organizations that influence elections without having to have any direct accountability. For example, what made that possible? If you look at Supreme Court decision, Citizens United versus FEC, the 2010 Supreme Court decisions fundamentally reshaped the landscape of campaign finance in the United States. The ruling, decided by a 5-4 majority, struck down restrictions on independent political expenditures by corporations and unions, arguing that such restrictions on them violated the First Amendment's free speech protections. This thus allowing corporations and the ultra-rich to spend unlimited money on elections, turning U.S. politics into a billionaire's playground, right? Billionaire-funded think tanks shape policy discussions and public narratives as well, influencing legislation on everything from healthcare to climate change, right? Project 2025 ring a bell here. That's where that came out of, right? They spent who knows how much money writing that playbook, right? Meanwhile, tech billionaires like Musk and Zuckerberg control major communication platforms, right? Able to shape political discourse and public perception, filling it with propaganda to keep us turned on each other instead of holding them accountable. Because if we're fighting each other, we're weak, and they know it, right? So they do everything they can to sow division, right? The consequences of this billionaire-driven political influence is policies that favor the wealthy, dismantle the workers' protections, and weaken public institutions, and continue to prioritize corporate interest over public well-being, right? The question we got to ask is, should wealth determine political power? And if not, what can we do to stop it? This trend has gone on too long, and we got to get out ahead of it somehow, right? We can see Elon Musk's influence, right, extends far beyond the industry that he dominates currently. His deep connections with political leaders, President Trump, government agencies, financial systems have granted him a level of access that is rarely questioned, despite the fact that his influence primarily serves his own interest rather than the American people. We've seen it. Like, look at it as unbiased as you can. The things that he does is benefiting him. Musk's financial contributions and his strategic alliances have secured him an unparalleled position within political circles, right? Allowing him to shape policy, secure government contract after government contract, and push his corporate agenda under the guise of innovation, right? We know that SpaceX and Tesla have received billions in government subsidies, while Musk continues advocating for even lower corporate tax cuts and weakened labor protection. Government grants and military contracts have propelled SpaceX to dominance, sidelining traditional aerospace competitors. He has direct access to national infrastructure, transportation, and security discussions, despite despite not even holding an elected office. He's never been elected to anything. Who gave him the keys to the city? He's led on deregulation efforts in the auto industry have allowed Tesla to bypass labor and safety standards, right, that other manufacturers must adhere to. Right? His ownership of X has given him significant control over political discourse, election narratives, and public sentiment. Right? He can share or not share whatever he wants. Right? He's continued to work on weakened antitrust enforcement, right, to ensure that his companies can operate with minimal competition or oversight. So while Musk and his team of PR people continue to try to brand him as a renegade fighting bureaucracy, the real reality is his political connections have allowed him to bend regulations, secure lucrative deals, and evade accountability. Rather than advancing policies that benefit the American public, Musk's engagement in government affairs has overwhelmingly benefited his own empire because he keeps securing favorable policy and leveraging federal agency for his own personal gain. He has consolidated both financial and political power, making it nearly impossible to challenge his influence. His public statements and media presence have reportedly manipulated stock prices, crypto markets, and policy debates, which further go to benefit him. With unchecked control over financial markets, political conversations, and technology platform, Musk's power raises urgent ethical concerns about the role of billionaires shaping public life. Despite branding himself as a champion of free speech, innovation, and space exploration, Musk's greatest beneficiary has always been and will always be himself. He's just not another billionaire. He's a walking case study of the dangers of unchecked corporate influence over democracy. His ability to erase oversight, manipulate policy, and control information flow isn't just a business strategy. It's a direct threat to transparency, fairness, and the very idea of accountable governance. So let's take a short break here, and we'll get back to see how Jake's doing. Looks like we got some possible good news for Jake. How about that? Jake's town, the bus company with a B, just announced big plans for a massive gigafactory in his small town, and local leaders and residents, man, they're psyched, right? The promise, thousands of high-paying jobs and economic revitalization and cutting-edge technology make it seem like a once-in-a-life opportunity. City officials are bending over backwards to accommodate, right? They're bending over backwards to accommodate the billionaires' demands. They're offering big tax breaks, zoning exemptions, infrastructure upgrades to the town, all at the taxpayers' expense, right? For a while, man, it seemed like the gamble had paid off. The gigafactory brought in workers, the local economy surged, and housing prices skyrocketed as the demand soared. But soon, the crack in the dream began to show, right? The high-paying jobs Musk had promised never materialized. Instead, most positions turned out to be temporary contract or gig work with no benefits. Right? Local businesses, excited about the factory's presence, had expanded operations only to be squeezed out when Musk's company favored automated systems and out-of-state suppliers. The tax breaks granted to Musk's company meant public services like schools, emergency response, they all suffered as the town struggled to make up for that lost revenue after giving all the tax breaks. Then came the layoffs. As production shifted to automation, bus company cut jobs, slashed wages, and moved operations elsewhere, leaving the town in a devastated economy, empty storefronts, and skyrocketing unemployment. The infrastructure investments that once seemed like a necessity now burden local taxpayers who were left footing the bill for a billionaire who moved on to his next adventure. Meanwhile, Musk, he used the story's success in the press conferences and social media as painted as proof of his visionary leadership. As a part, his company's stock soared, investors lined up, and politicians praised him as an innovator, while the community he left behind was crumbled. Jake had taken a job at the factory after losing his bookstore. Now he found himself unemployed again. His new job had never been stable, and now was left scrambling to find work in a town whose economy had been gutted by the very billionaire who promised prosperity. With no steady income and rising prices still inflated from the factory boom, Jake quickly fell behind on his payments. His savings, already depleted from trying to keep his bookstore open, ran dry. Local shelters were overwhelmed. Social services were underfunded due to the massive tax breaks given to the billionaire company. And finding another job in a collapsed economy, near impossible. Within months, Jake found himself living out of his car, parked behind the very gigafactory once promised him a bright future. And he wasn't alone. Dozens of former factory workers, gig employees, and small business owners who had once welcomed Busk's arrival now lined the streets in tents and makeshift shelters. The billionaire who had lured them in with promises of innovation, prosperity, had long since moved on, while those left behind struggled to survive in the wreckage of his corporate expansion. Jake had once believed in hard work and perseverance, the American dream, but now, as he shivered through the nights in his car, jobless, ignored, he realized the truth. The system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as it was designed. A system where billionaires take what they want, abandon what they destroy, and leave the working class to pick up the pieces. So the question remains, are we comfortable? Are we comfortable living in a society where unelected and unaccountable billionaires have the ability to shape our laws and dictate policies and control public discourse? And if not, what can be done? What can be done to ensure political power is returned to the people rather than concentrated in the hands of a few? The staggering level of wealth concentration in America today is unlike anything we've seen in modern history. We've never seen anything like this. A handful of billionaires now hold more wealth than the bottom half of the U.S. population. So just a couple of people hold more wealth than basically all of us, right? We know the top 1% control more than 90% of the stock market, while millions of working class Americans continue to live paycheck to paycheck. We know that few billionaires now have more financial resources than entire states and nations, which allows them to yield influence that transcends democracy. Wealth is no longer just a sign of success. It carries power that determines the policy and the laws and controls the flow of information that we count on every day to live our lives. This extreme wealth inequality isn't just about economics. It's about democracy itself. When billionaires can continue to fund politicians and buy media platforms and influence public discourse, the voices of everyday people are drowned out. The very foundation of democracy, where every vote and every citizen should matter equally, becomes an illusion. So the choice is ours. We live in a time where billionaires just don't influence policy, they're creating it. They don't just benefit from the system, they are the system. They shape our economy, our labor laws, our elections, our perceptions of success, all while convincing the rest of us this is the way it is, right? While they try to divide us, whether it's by picking out something out of one person out of the herd, they're dividing us one at a time, so we infight against each other. So why are we defending those who exploit us like this? Why are we fighting with each other? Why do we accept a system where wages have stayed stagnant while billionaires' wealth continues to skyrocket? Why do we take up for them? Why do we go to fight for them? Why do we continue to fight amongst ourselves, right? This isn't about being a Democrat or Republican, independent, or anything else. This is about the working class versus the ruling class. If we want a system that rewards hard work instead of hoarded wealth, that prioritizes people over profit, and that gives power back to the working majority instead of the wealthy few, then we have to act, right? We have to stop idolizing billionaires, start holding them accountable. We need to demand fair wages, stronger unions, and policies that put workers first, put the everyday majority working American first. We need to vote for leaders who aren't bought and paid for by corporate interests. The billionaire class wants us to believe we are powerless, but history proves otherwise. Every major labor victory, every worker protection, every right we have won today was fought for by people like us. So can we change this? That's not the question. The question is, do we have the courage to fight for the future we deserve? And that's it for today. Whew, that's an intense one. Not gonna lie. Once again, I'm Ben Chrisley. I hope this conversation's got you thinking and maybe questioning and a little fired up. I know it got me a little fired up. Just remember, this isn't just about billionaires and politics. It's about who holds power and whether we're willing to take it back. We, the people. We give the power. We are the people. We are the government. If this episode resonated with you, like, subscribe, give it a follow, 5 stars, share it with your friend. Get involved, talk about it, keep the conversation going. Change doesn't happen when we're quiet, right? If we're quiet, change isn't coming. We got to stand together. I appreciate you all. Thanks for joining me. I want you to take care of yourself and each other. Until I see you next time.